Hi, this is Vinny from the iMoot team. I thought I'd just jump in then and introduce Stuart. Um, I've known Stuart for a number of years now. I think at Brisbane Moodle Moot we first met. Stuart's another Moodle partner, um, HRDNZ over in New Zealand, and I'm really quite excited about this presentation. quite Be quite interesting to watch a slightly geeky one. Thank you, Stuart, for being part of iMoot 2014, and we'll look forward to seeing your presentation, MySQL reporting in Moodle. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks, Vinny. Yeah, I think we've known each other for, goodness knows, must be getting on for about 7 or 8 years, and met at a Moodle Moot many years ago. Probably Brisbane, maybe the one Chad ran. Long time anyway. I'm all dressed up. I've got my proper Moodle shirt on today, so at least that's a success for the day. I can say at least I got well dressed up for the session. Um, we had quite a large group on the first run of this session, and I think that was partly because it was the second thing on the program, so people were all kind of excited after the beginning and hung around, and that obviously worked well. That was nice. This is the first repeat session I've done, so in theory this should be even better than the first. So if you missed the first one that you come to this one, it should actually be better. Well, the first one wasn't that bad. That's my opinion, obviously. I have no idea, or very little idea, what everyone else thought. The other reason this session is possibly popular is because, in the iMoot we have a lot of people talking about their experiences, talking about Moodle from a teacher's perspective, and obviously less technical or less geeky presentations. So, that might be why this is on the radar for some people. Having said that, I'm going to try and make this as ungeeky and as untechnical as possible, make it as accessible as we can. Clearly, it is a technical subject, but we can go through things in a fairly straightforward and sensible way, hopefully. It is an introduction, so don't be too scared. It's for people who haven't done this type of thing before. So that would be a good question for me to just ask in the forum, in the public chat rather. Have you actually written a MySQL report before? Is this completely new to you? Are you a database administrator? Let's get a feel for the kind of level that you're at right now. Are you just here completely for interest? Okay, done a bit with MySQL, that's good. New to Moodle, okay, so who else have we got in there? Other people? Copied from someone else and modified it. Do you know what, Joshua? That's often the way we start, and there's nothing wrong with that. That really helps you learn quite effectively. Those little kind of snippets of code are one of the things we can fall back on. Okay, it's new to you, but you've done some programming. Okay, so you've got the kind of logical approaches to things which we're going to need, which is great. I'm actually going to switch my camera off just because it helps with the bandwidth. If anyone's got slow connections, it just cuts down, obviously, on the data, and I may well come back at the end. But, nice to see you talking to, I guess. So let's just knock that off. Presumably everyone can hear me okay. I didn't ask that question, but the fact that everyone's responded suggests that you can hear me okay. Of course, an online presenter should always say, "Can you hear me okay?" That's part of the standard, I guess. Yeah, the audio is quite good. I've had some good feedback. I'm actually using a blue Nessie USB mic into an Apple Mac, and USB mics tend to not be very good, but I have to say this is absolutely fantastic, and we use it a lot on the podcasts that we do. So yeah, the quality is really good for a USB. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so quick introduction. This is me, Stuart Mealor. I'm the managing director of HRD&Z. We're a Moodle partner based in New Zealand. although we have a lot of our people on our work here, we are very much kind of an international organisation. Yeah, it's a Nessie Blue USB. You should be able to find it from that. Not too expensive, pretty good. So just briefly, this is the main group of our team, and you will notice some names in here that you will see very much in this iMoot conference. And if you are on Moodle.org, if you're a member of Moodle.org, some of these names again will be very familiar to you. Teresa, who of course this year is an iMoot ambassador and doing a fantastic job, I have to say. She's beating me up every morning in terms of getting up, and she's later than me going to bed, so she must be getting exhausted by now. Teresa's a PHM, which is a particularly helpful Moodler, and in fact most of our team are PHMs, which means that they've been rated on Moodle.org as people who give good answers to forum questions. In fact, I think I'm fairly certain that we have more PHMs in our organisation than any other single organisation, and obviously I'm really proud of that. It kind of shows the knowledge and the quality, but also the approach of our team, the fact that they'll go in there and do these things to help people. We've got Anna over in Greece, who's also works closely with me for the Moodle Course Creator Certificate. So she's our lead mentor assessor and works with other Moodle partners around the world, helping them get the scheme up and running. Marielle, who's over in Mexico City, obviously native Spanish speaker, does a lot of work with us in that area, again at a PHM. Jean-Marc, who's in France, who started working with us this year. Paula, who's over in the USA, also a PHM. So a pretty good team of people with different specialisms, administration or teaching or just wide educational approaches. So I'm probably one of the more technical people in the team, although I have to say that most of my technical knowledge is self-taught. I was lucky many years ago that I ran Microsoft technical education centers and Lotus training centers. Anyone remember Lotus Notes? Yeah. So that was good because it meant that I could jump in on all these free training sessions on Microsoft networking and DNSs and goodness knows what. So got a good grounding in IT. So I will keep my eye on the public chat there, so if you've got questions as we're going or comments, if I can pick up on them as we go, I will. If you want to save questions towards the end, that's also okay. So this is the kind of structure that we're going to go through. We're going to look at some basics, e.g. having a Moodle test site, talk a little bit about MySQL and the command line interface, which can be a bit scary for some people, but shouldn't be really. The main thing we're going to look at are select queries, and select queries are the types of query that allow you to extract data out of a database to view it. And then we're going to look at some plugins that can make your life a little bit easier. So these are Moodle plugins specifically. And then we're going to look at MySQL Workbench and just mention Moodle Bytes, which is the kind of specialist course that we run for people. But if we can get you up and running with a little bit of help here so that you're able to go off on your own and go further in this area, that's the aim of this session really. So the first thing that I want to impress upon everyone is that you must have a test site to learn MySQL queries, and you should never try learning these things on a real live test site. I guess that applies equally to any database-driven, web application or website. When you are learning things, you make mistakes, and making a mistake with a live Moodle site can be it can be irreversible if your backups aren't 100% perfect and so on. So we never ever start learning and experimenting and trying wonderful things with MySQL on a real site. We use a test site. Now there are various approaches to that. If you're a Moodle administrator, you can actually set up, of course, your own Moodle test site. That's easy. If you want to, you could, of course, duplicate your existing Moodle site so that when you're learning how to query a database, you're actually dealing with the real data on your site, or rather a copy of it. So if you do have that ability, that's a really nice way to start learning. If you're not a Moodle administrator, or even if you are and you're not quite sure about setting up another site on your server, then the easiest thing is to create a local site, a local test site. And I have to say that all our team run local Moodle test sites. I think Teresa's probably got something like 3 or 4 versions of Moodle, different versions of Moodle on test sites on her laptop. I've got 2 on this one at the moment. And it really is an invaluable tool, both for MySQL learning, but also just for general, learning to administer Moodle. It's a great thing to have. So just quickly, if you haven't got a test site, or you're not sure how you would set up a test site, you can do this on a normal PC. You can also do it on a laptop, although of course laptops are not servers. They're not designed to run as servers do. All the effort of a normal PC or laptop is very much at the front end, showing applications, using the windowing system. That's where all the processing is. With servers, a lot of the processing is actually in the background. It's quite a different approach. So you won't find it if you've got an old laptop. You can probably still do this, but you'll find it may well struggle for speed. Although when you're just dealing with MySQL, it doesn't really make a lot of difference because there's no big user interface that's needing to be developed. So if you want to, you can install a local, what we call often a local host, a local server on Windows. There's some good documentation for that. I'm not a Windows user, so thanks, Vinny. I'm not a Windows user, so I wouldn't advise on that, but there's some good documentation there. There's a great install package for Mac. If you're using a Mac, that will go straight onto an Apple Mac and run quite nicely. And also some information there for installing on Linux. There's some instructions for Ubuntu, which are obviously very similar to Debian, quite similar to lots of other Linux distributions. I guess if you're running Linux, then you probably don't need too much help with installing a LAMP stack and Moodle. So, but there's lots of documentation available to help you with that. So one of the things that we're going to look at here quite extensively is the command line interface. So we use these terms, terminals, consoles, and shells, and we use them quite interchangeably. Then they're actually all slightly different. But basically, what we mean by a terminal or a console or a shell is that we are using, like, on Windows, you used to have the old DOS prompt, so you could see, you could get to MS-DOS, and it was basically just a black window that you enter text. So that's the idea, is that we're interacting with a text level, a command line level, which looks a bit geeky, and it's not really that bad. Once you get used to it, it's actually fine. And so basically, we're not going to use a lot of the time a GUI to learn this, because it's really good to understand how pure the command line is. We either get things right or we get them wrong, and we don't have that layer of a Windows system or a Mavericks on OS X actually doing things that we don't understand in between. We're interacting directly with the database, so it's really good to do it this way, at least at first. So if you're a Windows user, there's a number of options for which command line interface you might want to use. The Windows 32 console is the default one. I know that a lot of people don't like that and think it's a bit clunky and not very nice. Putty seems to be, which uses Xterm underneath, which seems to be a very popular one. And Console 2 as well is a console which is becoming more and more popular on Windows. So you've got a choice of what you might use there. I'm pretty sure they're all free as well. If you're on a Mac, then you have Terminal, which is the default terminal on OS X, and that's not bad at all. It's quite very usable. An Xterm, of course. There are others that you can, find and download. And if you're on Linux, of course, there are possibly hundreds of command line interfaces, and that's because Linux is more of a server operating system. That's where it initially comes from. So and this tradition of accessing things through the command line. Although there are obviously some very good desktop environments like GNOME and KDE now, there are plenty of consoles and shells to use there. So I don't know whether anyone has a favourite that they want to share in the chat, but it really isn't going to make a lot of difference, and certainly not to the level that we're going to talk about today. If you were going to start developing a lot more, then you might research your choice and home in on one that really suits your workflow. So once you've got your local host installed and you've decided which command line editor you'll be using, the next thing to do is obviously to start and to get to MySQL. So on Windows, if you're using the XAMPP distribution, which is one of the methods explained in Moodle docs, it's really simple. You can just start the MySQL executable. The nice thing about this little web interface is that you can see that your web server's running, and you can see that MySQL's running when it is. So it's a nice little interface for people. If you're on a Mac, all you really need to do is to type MySQL. There is an issue here that MySQL would not be by default within your path. So you wouldn't have the rights, if you like, to automatically get to that probably. But if you're on a Mac and you want to do this, that link that I put in there, and obviously you can get to that after this session, that helps you set this up on a Mac if you're not getting that access. And it's a really great guide. It's very straightforward. It will guide you through it in a very kind of non-technical way. Absolutely great. And of course, if you're on Linux, you'll probably start the command line with something like this. So you're starting MySQL as the user Moodle on the local host in this situation. Cool. So from this point on, it wouldn't really matter whether you're a Windows user, a Mac user, or a Linux user, because everything that we're going to talk about during the rest of this session is pretty much the same. I have got a number of screenshots in here, and as we can see there, I've actually taken these I'm actually using VirtualBox on a Mac, which is like Parallels, or it gives us virtual environments. So I've got a distribution of Ubuntu working on there, and as you can see, I've been able to start MySQL just by typing MySQL and hitting return, and I'm also able to exit or leave MySQL just by typing quit. I think exit also works as well. I've always used quit, and I guess you get used to what you do, so I always use quit. Anyone can tell me, I'm sure someone can tell me whether exit works as well. So as we go through this, let's start off with some of the kind of basics. When you install MySQL on your server, it will actually have a number of small databases already set up, like a kind of test one. And if you want to see the databases that are on your server once you've connected, you just issue that simple command, show databases. Now notice that there's a couple of things to notice here. I've actually formatted the commands here in capitals with a different font just to make it stand out. You don't have to be in capitals. I think it'll work quite happily in either. But the other thing to notice is the semicolon at the end. The semicolon is what tells the MySQL server to actually execute the command. If you just press enter, nothing will happen. So a command always ends with that semicolon. And as we can see in the screenshots, yeah, there it is in lowercase. So I've just typed in show tables in this case. So as well as having show databases, which would list the databases on our server, we can extend that and use that show command and say show tables. And what it's shown me in very simple terms are the tables in LMSDB, which is my little learning management system database. And it's showing me that the tables within that database, well, there's only one table there right now, LMS user. MySQL is also telling me that I got one row in the result set and that it took 0 seconds. Now, clearly, as we start working with big servers and Moodle sites with 1,000 or 10,000 users, the number of seconds will go up, and that's something that we need to be aware of. That if we use queries on a server that take a while to run, like 10, 15, 20 seconds, that can impact the speed of your server for other people. And again, that's why we want to learn these things on a local host or a test server, not necessarily on a live server. So there we've got show databases, that's straightforward, and show tables within a database. Pretty easy. So although we can see the tables, what we might want to see is a bit more information about that LMS user table. What's actually in that table, or how is that table constructed? And to do that, we use the describe command. And again, it's the same sort of syntax. Describe the table name, semicolon. And there we can see a lot more information. We can actually see how these rows and columns are actually designed within our database. So I can see the field, and what I've actually done here is almost replicated in miniature the Moodle database. So things like email and email stop. So we've got username, and country and language. Really important to notice the type of data that's expected in those fields as well. Because if you are going to query successfully, then you need to know the table name and the field name and the data type quite often, because it's no good looking for the string England if in fact countries are all abbreviated to 2 characters. And as we can see there, the country in this case is a variable character, but we're expecting 2 characters to represent that. We've also got a null field. Probably don't need to talk too much about null at the moment, apart from to say that if something is not allowed to be null, then there has to be a value. And something like an email address, you wouldn't want someone to register on your Moodle site and not provide an email address. So we probably would want that controlled. So question from Dorothy there, would you set them to auto run at a quiet time on the network? Yeah, absolutely. If you are going to query a live server, then like your backup jobs and your cron jobs to run your backups, you do those overnight. Of course, if you're if you're running a site which is international, global, and running 24 hours of the day, that's a bit more difficult to schedule. So the select command is probably one of the most powerful commands we've actually got within MySQL, and it's the one, although it's quite basic, it's incredibly powerful, and you'll probably use it for almost all of the querying you actually do. Because what it does is it just allows you to view that data. It pulls the data out and displays it. So the basic usage for this is very straightforward. Select command, any options that you're adding in there, and from, in this example, a table. So, straightforward. And if you've done anything like filtering with Excel, at a reasonably high level, all these kind of options, select something from here or show something from here, it's just basic kind of logical statements. So so I should mute my microphone while I'm taking a drink of coffee. So here is an example of pretty much the most basic kind of select query we could have. And here I'm saying select everything from the LMS user table. So the first thing to notice in the screenshot is that I've actually issued a use command, and I've said use LMSDB, semicolon, enter. And that's what we use to change databases. So there may be, 3 or 30 or 300 databases on your server, and if you want to actually play with one and start selecting information from it, you need to identify to MySQL which database you're working with. So in this case, we just say use and then the database name. We can see it's changed. That's cool. I can then use this very simple select command, select everything from LMS user. So the asterisk is a wildcard, meaning everything, and I guess that's similar to what you may have encountered in Excel formulas and so on. It's kind of standard everything character, and then we can see that it's brought back the information from our LMS user table. We can see the various different columns: username, first name, last name, email, stop, country, language, and we can see there are 2 records in there. And just to confirm that underneath, MySQL is telling me there's 2 rows in that result data set. I've used the word columns there and rows. Some people say fields in MySQL. Technically, the right terminology is rows and columns, but it really doesn't matter. It's a bit like terminals, shells, and consoles. If you go to your favorite search engine and you type MySQL basic tutorials, you'll kind of find these things used interchangeably, and as long as you know what they mean, you're absolutely fine. So, okay. So let me give you a quick question to see who's actually awake here. Which of, that's horrible, isn't it? Which of these would actually select everything from a table and display it? Oh, look at that, you see, everyone's awake. Yeah, it is actually quite easy to, if you're not familiar with these commands to begin with, you might think it is select all, or you may forget to put the semicolon on the end. It's until you get used to them and it becomes second nature. You'll often put a query in, semicolon, hit enter, and get the answer. I love the fact that Dorothy copied her answer from above. That's fantastic. Vinny just asking an interesting question. I'm assuming all these commands are relevant to phpMyAdmin if querying over the web. Yes, because all you're doing is issuing MySQL commands. You just happen to be using phpMyAdmin, which is a web interface, in the same way that the command line interface is interacting with MySQL. So yeah. Cool. So what would happen if we selected everything from LMS user and we had 20,000 records there? Not only would that be a little bit awkward because I'm having to scroll up and down through 20,000 records, but of course, again, it would take a long time on a server, which again might impact on other users. So one of the first things that we'd like to be able to do is actually to limit results. And also, do we actually need to see every column in that table? Maybe we just want to see the username or the first name, last name, and language, in which case we don't need to see every column. And of course, every single piece of data that's coming back is taking time. And if you don't need 20,000 country entries, because that's not relevant to what you're searching for, then you shouldn't search for it. You should exclude it, because your query will be that much faster. There's this question. So default output will be to display. Yeah. Yes, the default output of the select query is always, onto the screen. If you want to, well, we'll probably answer some of the questions around how could you get this exported or output differently as we go on. That's okay. So if I now just enhance that query very slightly by adding limit 10 to the end, what I will get are the first 10 records. So there might be 10,000 records in here, or 1 million. We wouldn't know right now, because what we've done is said select everything from LMS user, but limit it to the first 10 rows. And that's pretty straightforward. I automatically, when I'm developing new queries, automatically kind of put a limit on the end, because it's often a lot faster. You're not having to wait, 2 or 3 seconds for 1,000 records to come back. It's, it's instant. As we're being told there, that's actually still taken 0 seconds. So you can't get much faster than that. If we wanted, of course, that was just showing us, that just happens to show us the first 10 rows within that table. If I wanted to say maybe not the first 10 rows, but another group of rows, something else, I can use this process to add to say, let's start from number 15. Up to 10,000. So I can actually control which, if you imagine your thousands and thousands of rows here, I can actually home in on specific groups of rows. I don't have to look at the whole result, the whole potential result. I can actually narrow that down quite effectively. So far we've used that select all statement to show all the table data. So in that last example, we are saying select all from the table, so we're actually getting every column automatically there. As I said, if we don't need every column, then it makes it a lot faster and it's less impact to just select the columns you want. And you just do that simply by saying select column name from database name, in this case limit 10. So I've just chosen to display the first 10 records in the username table. Again, pretty straightforward. I hope everyone's pretty happy at this stage. Just adding those little commands in. I can select, of course, multiple columns, as long as I know what they are, which is something that you kind of get used to. The more you work with a specific database, you'll I'm sorry it's 1 a.m. Joshua, that's probably not the best time to do this session. Never mind. At least it's not 1 a.m. for me, because that would probably be even worse. So here I'm selecting 2 columns. I'm selecting the first name and then the last name from that LMS user table, and in this case I'm limiting the results to 5. So, and it wouldn't matter if those 2 columns were side by side or completely separate in the database. I'm just returning the data from those 2 columns. And of course, well, I'm saying of course, it might not seem obvious, but there's no reason that we have to return that column data in the same order that it happens to have been first set up in the database. So as well as being able to select first name, last name from a table, I can select last name, first name. So that tells you that in fact, when you're looking at this table with its 10 or so columns, that you can select that data and display it in different orders very, very easily. Just the columns you want and in the order you want, not necessarily the order that's just in the table. Okay. So as well as the username, first name, last name, or username, you might want to quickly check where people live and their language. So in that case, you just select the country, language, and first name. So as you can see, any order, any column, as long as you are selecting columns that actually do exist. Obviously, if you select columns that don't exist, if you were to type in language rather than lang, clearly that would be an error, and you wouldn't get that data. Is there a limit to the string of columns in the select query? I don't think there is. I mean, you'd probably find that the limit would more be, what you can actually mentally order and type in. I mean, if you're going to type in something that's 60 columns because you don't want the 61st column, then you're probably better just looking at them all, because that's going to take you no time at all. So far we've looked at this data. We've used the select query and we've extracted out just to display everything, but it's always been in the order that the records were entered. If you think about it, and I'll just flick back maybe 1 or 2. No, just a bit further maybe. Oh goodness, there we go. So everything that we're seeing at the moment, the order of it is actually in the order of ID. And of course, if we're thinking about Moodle, the ID number is the user ID number, and that's the sequence in which they were created. So I'm sure you know that every user on a Moodle site has a user ID, and you can see that when you sort of click on your profile. And that's the default order that's coming back each time so far, because we haven't done anything in terms of ordering. But of course, most of the time, if I write a query to extract some information about users or about courses or about assignment dates, anything, I would almost certainly want some other type of order to make sense, Oh, there you go. I'd already prepared this. There you go. So at the moment, I've just selected everything from LMS course. So I've now just switched slightly from looking at a table that might be about users to looking at a table that might be holding information about courses on our system. So we might have a course ID, yeah, pretty basic stuff in Moodle, a category ID, we'd have a full name for our course, a short name for our course, whether the course is visible or not, and that's just essentially a switch. 0 is not visible, 1 is visible, and the language abbreviated to 2 letters. The visible one, I mean, if you start to think about what you're doing as a Moodle administrator when you're in Moodle and you switch a course from being visible to hidden or hidden to visible, effectively what you're doing is communicating through that form, through PHP, sending the information to MySQL and getting it to switch a 0 to a 1. You know, that's what's actually happening in the background. So if we wanted to, we could go into a database at this level, switch that around, and that would affect instantly our Moodle site. Now, certainly in this presentation, we're not going to talk about updating and deleting things because that's not really necessary for querying. That's a kind of a different level. But it might be useful for us to have everything in order. So rather than just saying select everything from this course, which will give us the some kind of random order in terms of the order they were created, I've actually said, well, show me this in alphabetic order of full name of the course. Yeah, David, absolutely right. You can turn off the email notifications or the email stop field. It'll have 2 values. 0 means emails go through, and having a 1 would switch on the email stop. Yeah, absolutely. That's simple. That's all we're dealing with. Isn't it amazing that in this day and age we can get back to 1s and 0s? So yeah, so there we can see that the table has been sorted out by full name, which is exactly what we wanted. Of course, we didn't specify there whether we wanted it, whether we wanted our sort in ascending or descending order. Which, you know, if you're dealing with sorting in Excel, for example, or a spreadsheet, you'd always kind of think, you know, do I want it ascending or descending? By default, when you sort in MySQL, it will be ascending if you don't tell it otherwise. If you actually want it the other way around, and of course you might be looking at something like dates or amounts where you want to go from the highest to the lowest, you just use the descending command option in there, and that will sort it out the opposite way around, which is quite nice. As you can see, a lot of this is just about learning the commands and just combining them together to do slightly more funky things. So we can also, and we might need to, sort by multiple columns at the same time. Now, here I've got my language column correctly sorted. So my query is select language and full name from the courses table and order that by the language column. And that's absolutely fine. It's done that. It's given me English before it's given me French, which is cool. But if we think about this, within that English grouping there, kind of world fashion, would be nice to have world fashion at the end and classic MGs at the top, so that the full name of courses is, you know, subsorted within the language. And you can see how that might apply in many contexts. So you might have categories. So you're listing everything by category and all the courses within categories, but you still might, it would be a big advantage probably to have the courses sorted within the categories as well. and that's essentially the same as this. Languages within full name, or full name within languages in this case. So the way we do that, surprisingly, or not surprisingly, is to kind of, just add the next part of the command. So this time I've said select the language and full name columns from the LMS course, order it by language, and then order it by full name. That's simple. Again, it's not hard for people that may have come to this session being a bit scared. It really isn't too scary. It's pretty much just based on your familiarity with the commands and having a very logical approach to what you do, and obviously a bit of practice. So I was going to ask this question, but I'm gonna speed up a little bit. You can obviously review that later yourselves. Something else that we often want to do is to count within our database. Count the number of assignments, count the number of students, count the number of courses, and we just use this select count in brackets the everything. So I'm counting everything from LMS user, and that's telling me I've got 20 items in there. Select count from courses, that tells me that I've effectively got 8 courses. And select everything from categories, that tells me that I've got 6 categories. So as you can see, the count command at its most basic is works well. It is worth remembering that counting is actually can be a little bit awkward, because do you count a space as a 0, or do you count a 0 as a value? So it can get a little bit tricky counting everything, but not too bad. And obviously you can sort of develop that knowledge as you go. But I can use it quite nicely with groups as well. So counting and groups kind of go hand in hand together for me. So here I've selected the country column, and I said I want you to count from that table and group by country. So it's automatically added the country column for me. I haven't needed to sort of specify that because my command is doing it for me. And what we can see there is it's grouped the countries and telling me how many users are actually in that country. So I've got 9 in the UK, I've got 1 in France, I've got 1 in Spain. So counting and grouping are often something that you want to do together. And that's where you can sometimes start to get a little bit confused by the syntax, but as long as you think it through, I'm selecting something, I'm counting from, and I'm grouping by. As long as you get that kind of order right, you'll be fine. And we can also, extend that and say, okay, it's getting a little bit more complicated now, but not really. So I'm now selecting the country and the language columns. I'm counting and I'm grouping by country. And I'm also ordering it by country in this instance. Again, just building those commands together, just combining them in to get the data set that I actually would like to see. If we want to, we can also use a distinct command. If you think about it, if I counted the entries in language, then it might give me 15 because there are 15 students with different languages. But in reality, there may only be 3 languages in use. And this is where we would use the distinct command to actually just show me the unique values that are in there. Don't show me every single row. Just show me the rows that are, if you like, unique. That can be something that is useful as you start to develop more sophisticated queries. And using the where, I mean, this is where we start to get really quite powerful and quite clever. Is we can use the where command, and that'll allow us to filter the results. So far we've been looking at columns, looking at rows, sorting them out, limiting them, setting them in different orders, counting them. But what about when we want to just look at a certain subset? So in this example, I've selected everything from the course table where the language equals French. That's simple. So instantly, even if there was 1,000 courses in here, if only 2 of them were in French, then that is exactly what I would see. And I could do exactly the same thing and say, select everything from LMS course where visible equals 0. In that case, I wouldn't need the speech marks because I'm not searching for text. I'm searching for a numeric value. Show me all, select all from courses where category equals 3. It's going to show me all the courses just in category 3. So you can see how instantly powerful the addition of the where command actually makes that. Suddenly I can zoom in on a very small piece of data that's specific to what I want to see, rather than seeing the whole thing all the time. And you can also do quite clever things with very simple options, like say, what if you wanted to show all the courses that are not in the first category? Well, we just use the exclamation mark to say, category isn't equal to 1. That can, that's one of those things that can catch you out first, because I guess most people would use a star to mean everything and maybe an exclamation mark to mean 1 character, in queries in Microsoft Office and so on. But here it has different meaning. Category is not equal to 1 in this case. And again, you could apply that instantly to all sorts of contexts. You could say, select everything from courses where the language isn't English. And what you'll see are any courses on your site that aren't set to English. You could do the same thing on the student table. Select everything from LMS user where the language isn't English, and that give you all your foreign speaking students. So, or all the people that have set their language to something other than English. So even though you have very small, short, sweet commands, when you start to think about the context, you can actually take that across all sorts of data within your database and get meaningful results. So we're getting towards the end. I'll just mention this one, which is if you want to start retrieving extremely specific data, the same theories apply. We can select the first name, last name, and email columns from the user table, but say where the username equals. So we're really homing in on a particular user. Notice that in the screenshot there, I've only actually asked for the first name, last name, and email in the results, even though I've used username, which is the column that I'm searching by. I don't actually have to have that column returned in the results. The query will still work. The select will still bring back the data you want, even though you're querying by a column that isn't displayed in the answer. That can catch people out at first. That wouldn't seem to be an obvious thing that you'd want to do, but in many cases it is. So, okay. There are a few more slides in here which I'm going to skip through, but you can go through these. The presentation is going to be uploaded, so you'll be able to access this. But again, just another example of combining things together. Show me the full name and short name and ID from a particular table, from the course table, where the language isn't English and the category is 1. And there's the data again. not necessarily showing the fields, the columns that I've searched by, but showing that. Can you create reports that are visible to only certain users or user roles? Yes, you can, David. I'm actually going to move on a little bit, and because I'm conscious of the time, I'm going to squidge on. There are more things in here that you can refer to later on. Okay, so what I want to finish on is looking at some plugins for Moodle that, once you've learnt the basics, are really handy. There's 3 plugins I want to mention: Moodle Adminer, Configurable Reports, and the Ad-hoc database queries. So first of all, Moodle Adminer, which is just a plugin that you can get from Moodle.org, the plugins bit, and it will install into your server area, Moodle Adminer. And essentially this replaces phpMyAdmin, which many of us used for many years, and there was a Moodle plugin for that, but the Moodle Adminer is a lot better, and it's the one that you should be using. It's very easy to take SQL and create quick queries in there, but one of the nice things is it's also very easy to export data. So you can actually select a database, export the data, and then maybe import that into your own local test site, for example. Very powerful little utility that just plugs into Moodle. We've got the ad-hoc databases query, again, a Moodle plugin, and that will plug in and that will actually appear in your reports area. This, I know Tim was at the first session, but basically one of the beauties of this database plugin is that you can run queries on demand. So down here we've got a simple select query, selecting some information from a log table between certain times, and the on-demand aspect means, and the scheduled query means that we can actually set this up so it's scheduled to run each night or each week or each month, and we can, I think that also sends an email if you want it to the administrator, so that's pretty cool. We can also use this plugin to download the results here as a CSV, so we can actually instantly put out, so there's our little query results, and we can export those as a CSV file straight away. If you do that and you're more comfortable filtering the data in Excel, then obviously that's a perfect kind of solution for that. So we can save queries and add queries and build up a little database of queries that are useful for us. And someone asked the question earlier, one of the great things about this particular plugin is that we can actually give a permission to certain users or sets of users to say that they can see these results. So if you have a manager or an auditor or someone that needs to look at this data, doesn't necessarily need to be a teacher in the course, you're able to give permission to that person to look at this data. Now again, bear in mind, if you're running MySQL queries on a live server, it can slow it down. So think very carefully. Do not suddenly give every teacher in your organization the ability to run every query on your site. That will be a disaster, I guarantee it. The other plugin that I wanted to mention is developed by Juan over in Spain, who I've met at the Moodle Meet in Spain a couple of times. Really nice guy, very clever, and he's developed this plugin called Configurable Reports. Now, one of the beauties of all these systems is that in the ad hoc database reports or configurable reports or the Moodle Adminer, you can take your same SQL queries and just copy them between one and the other because it's just SQL. So if you develop in one, you can still use the other plugin, or you can find little bits of MySQL query. You can develop it in the command line, but you can actually put it into here on your production site, for example. one of the great things about the configurable reports is that, first of all, you can get these great graphs, which are just perfect for, copy and paste or cut and paste into your monthly reports, or for a special management report, or for an IT review of how your Moodle site's going. And as you can see, it's very much driven by tabs and menus, and you select different options, and you basically build your query up by making you say, what type of query do I want? Well, you can do a course report, or a category report, or of course a straightforward MySQL report. You can do nice things like sorting it. You can set up exports so that it's exported in Excel or open document formats. Very powerful little plugin. Just amazing how many people haven't found this in a way. One day I'm sure that this is going to be in Moodle core, because for administrators it's just absolutely wonderful. I do want to mention MySQL Workbench as well, quickly. This is, if you are sort of looking at the subject that we've covered today and thinking, yes, that's something I'd like to go further in, then I highly recommend having a look at MySQL Workbench. Maybe not straight away, but certainly once you get going. It's an incredibly powerful system. I'm just going to skip through here. What it allows you to do is to visually, for example, look at your database. So here we can actually see the tables, within. Well, I can construct this, so I can drag the tables around and put all my forum tables together and think about the fields that are the columns that are in there, and how I would write a query to extract the information I want. So even just at a basic visual level, it kind of really helps you think about what it is you're trying to achieve. You can see here that what I've done is just, for example, I've taken a whole number of Moodle version 2.4 glossary tables, and I put them into this, and then I can actually see the Moodle glossary entries. I can see everything that relates to that. I can click on here and see the metadata for each column. Absolutely brilliant, very powerful. Does take a while to learn, but in fact, that most of it is so kind of intuitive that it's a great it's a great amount of fun. And again, if you want to, you can take those MySQL reports that you've developed elsewhere and just put them straight into here. And of course, you've got this lovely context highlighting, so you can see if you've missed anything obvious in there as you're developing. So another approach, very, very powerful and useful tool. Yep, it is amazing. I'll just mention as well, to finish off, that we do run a Moodle Bytes MySQL reporting course specifically for this subject. I'll come back to that in a second. One thing to be aware of is that everything's going to change slightly with Moodle 2.7 because of the new logging system. So a lot of the reports that we've developed over the previous kind of years, since Moodle 2 really, a lot of them relied on the Moodle log table, because that collects logs about what users are doing. But that log table is now going to be a legacy item option from Moodle 2.7 onwards, and in fact you shouldn't be using it. The logs are going to a different table, ideally, which will be faster, and it actually saves a lot more information. So the existing log table in Moodle 2 through to 2.6 looks like this, and the new log table in Moodle 2.7 actually looks like this. And you can see that it's capturing a lot more information, and it's also capturing a lot of context information. So I mean, this is obviously brand new. I haven't had a chance to get in there and start working with new queries in that table yet, but it is worth mentioning, if you've developed queries previously, based around the log table, they are going to have to change. So I mentioned that we do run a course specifically on this subject. It's run over an 8-week period, and we take you basically from beginning, installing Moodle locally, the command line, basic commands, through to joins, through MySQL Workbench, etc. You get a lovely badge and a certificate if you complete, if you can stand it. But notice that we do only run this twice a year. I actually facilitate this course, and it can get a little bit intensive. So we only run it twice a year, and it starts on the 1st of October, April, which of course we just missed, and the next one will be the 1st of October. You can find details of that. Just look for Moodle Bytes and moodlebytes.com, and you'll find the course description and outline and registration and so on. And we are, of course, going to be revising the course to some extent to take into account the changes in 2.7 probably. I cover Linux twice. That should probably say Windows, thank you. But yes, it probably does need, we probably do need Linux covering twice for some people. Cool. Well, that's pretty much it. The course outline is online. You can see what's covered. It's basically in a lot more depth than we've done there. We have lots of people from all around the world who've taken this course in the last 2 years, from Switzerland and Japan and Hong Kong and India and Italy, because I think it's actually the only specialist course in MySQL reporting for Moodle that's out there, because obviously it is a little bit specialist. It's not for everyone. And we do all kinds of interesting things in there, like explain how to use Linux time or Unix time within queries, and how to avoid slow queries that are going to break your server. Yeah, that's all interesting stuff. So that's it, guys. Obviously, an hour is not a long time to introduce something that is, a big area, a big sophisticated area. But hopefully that's been useful. If that can start some of you on your way, that's really, great. Very happy. If any of you want to consider our, more extensive course in October, it'd be great to see you. But I hope that's been useful.
Hi Stuart, this is Vinny from the iMoot team. I just thought I'd jump in and say thank you very much again. And just to ask if anybody's got any questions for Stuart, then
yeah, of course.
Feel free to grab the mic and ask them, or pop them into the text chat. But for me, that was perfect. That was really, really interesting. I've had a little play before, and it's nice just to kind of hear all these things together, just to tie it all up, and it's certainly whetted my appetite to go off and have a little play now. So I was only half joking about the iMoot site performance. I probably will start tinkering. But thank you very much anyway, Stuart.
Yeah, experiment on the iMoot site after it's finished, Vinny.
Well, I was thinking for our wrap-up session, we often do a kind of iMoot by numbers. So I'm just sitting here thinking of all the MySQL queries that I could start pulling. So I guess it looks like there's no more questions. So once again, thank you very much, Stuart. Great presentation as always.
Okay, thanks, Vinny. I'll just answer Dorothy's question there. Do you have a mini version for people who are good at copying and checking others' code, but not really able to cope with the full MySQL thing? To be honest, I mean, no, we don't. We don't have a miniature version of it, but I would say that even if you've never kind of touched this area before, that in our 8-week course, I would say you would only struggle, in theory, with maybe the last 20% maximum. I really think that we've, developed the course. If you know Moodle, I really think we've developed the course in a way that really is, we've had people do the course that have never done this before, and honestly, they didn't really struggle until towards the end, where we tried to give them some of the slightly more complex concepts and ideas. But yeah, I mean, honestly, even if you've never done this before, you would be fine in the course. It's only a kind of 2 to 4 hours work a week. So if you've never done this before, yes, you'd be 3 or 4 hours a week maybe, rather than people who've maybe done this sort of thing before and they'd find that they'd cover it quite happily in 2 hours. Oh yeah, that'd be a great idea if you do it with someone else. You've got a colleague that you can copy from. No, you've got a colleague that you can sort of spur each other along a bit, right? Mm. Yes, David, it's completely asynchronous. All our Moodle Bytes courses are, because we deal with a totally international audience. So it's actually really hard for us to try and put anything that's synchronous in there, because even our facilitators are, in Mexico and Greece and New Zealand and America. So even for us, it's difficult. So everything is asynchronous because we found that works best for people. Okay, guys, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing your queries posted on Moodle.org, or maybe see you in the course later in the year. Thanks.